The clock on the wall showed 2:17 in the morning, but Lisa wasn't even close to feeling sleepy. She sat at her tiny desk in the corner of her dorm room, staring at the same paragraph in her psychology textbook that she'd been trying to understand for the past 40 minutes. The words just wouldn't stick in her brain. Anymore, her third year at college was turning out to be nothing like she'd imagined. Back in high school, she'd been one of those students who could breeze through exams without much effort. But university was different. The workload was crushing, and to make things worse, she was working 20 hours a week at a campus coffee shop and another 15 hours helping out at the library. Without those jobs, she simply couldn't afford tuition. The result? She was exhausted all the time. Her mind felt like a foggy mess. Every time she sat down to study, her thoughts would drift off after just a few minutes. She'd find herself thinking about unpaid bills, or that rude customer from her morning shift, or whether she'd have enough money for groceries next week. Anything but the material she desperately needed to learn. Her grades were sliding downward, and she could feel the panic setting in. Last semester, she'd managed to keep a solid average. This semester, she was barely scraping by with C's and D's. At this rate, she might lose her scholarship, and if that happened, she'd have to drop out entirely. Lisa rubbed her tired eyes and tried to focus on the textbook again. Something about cognitive behavioral therapy and how the brain processes trauma. Important stuff that she actually found interesting when her brain was working properly. But right now, the sentences just blurred together into meaningless noise. She reached for her phone, thinking maybe a quick break would help. But she knew from experience that a quick break would turn into an hour of mindlessly scrolling through social media. And then she'd feel even worse about wasting time. She put the phone face down on the desk and forced herself to look at the textbook again. That's when she heard the door unlock. Her roommate Kelly walked in, looking tired but somehow more relaxed than Lisa felt. Kelly worked at the university's music library, usually closing up late at night after everyone else had gone home. "You're still up?" Kelly asked, dropping her bag on her bed. "I thought you'd be asleep by now," Can't Lisa said, her voice flat with exhaustion. "This exam is in 3 days, and I haven't even finished reading half the material. My brain just won't cooperate." Kelly walked over and glanced at the mess on Lisa's desk. Empty coffee cups, scattered notes, highlighters in every color. It looked like a war zone of failed study attempts. "How long have you been sitting here?" Kelly asked. "Since I got home from my shift." "That was like 6 hours ago." Lisa let out a long sigh. "I keep reading the same stuff over and over, but nothing's actually going into my head. It's like my brain is full of static or something." Kelly nodded slowly, like she was thinking about something. Then she said, "You know what's weird? I see this all the time at the music library. Students come in looking exactly like you do right now, all stressed and scattered. But then something interesting happens." "What do you mean?" Lisa asked, not really expecting any useful answer. She'd tried everything already. More coffee, less coffee, taking breaks, not taking breaks, studying in different locations. Nothing worked. "Well," Kelly continued, sitting on the edge of Lisa's desk, "students who work in the classical music section, or who sit near it while studying, they always seem more focused. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but I've been working there for 2 years now, and I've seen the pattern over and over." Lisa frowned. "What, you think music makes them smarter or something?" "Not exactly. But there's actually research about it. Classical music, specifically certain types, can help your brain focus better. Something about the way it's structured, the patterns and rhythms. It's not magic, it's just science." Lisa had heard vague things about this before. Wasn't there something called the Mozart effect? But she'd always assumed it was just one of those trendy myths that people like to believe. Like how eating carrots was supposed to give you night vision or whatever. "I don't know," Lisa said. "I've always studied in silence. Music just distracts me." "That's because you're probably thinking of music with lyrics, or modern stuff with beats that grab your attention," Kelly explained. "Classical music is different. It sits in the background. Your brain picks up on the patterns, and somehow that helps create a kind of calm, focused state. I've seen it work for so many people." Lisa was skeptical, but she was also desperate. She was running out of time and options. What did she have to lose? Okay, she said. Say I wanted to try this. What would I even listen to? Kelly pulled out her phone and started scrolling through something. There are tons of playlists online. Here, let me send you a few. Try them tomorrow when you study. Just keep the volume low, like background noise. Don't focus on the music itself. Just let it be there while you work. She sent Lisa a few links, then yawned and started getting ready for bed. Lisa looked at the links on her phone, still feeling doubtful. But she was so tired of failing, so tired of feeling like her brain didn't work anymore. Maybe it was worth a shot the next afternoon. After her morning shift at the coffee shop, Lisa went to her usual spot in the library. She had 3 hours before her next class, and she needed to get through at least 2 chapters of reading. She opened her laptop, pulled up one of the playlists Kelly had sent, put in her EARBUDS. The music started playing softly. It was gentle piano music. Nothing dramatic or attention, just simple, flowing melodies that seemed to repeat and develop in interesting ways. Lisa opened her textbook and started reading. At first, she was very aware of the music. She kept noticing it, listening to the melodies, wondering if this was actually going to help or just be another distraction. But after about 10 minutes, something strange happened. She forgot the music was playing. Not forgot in the sense that it wasn't there anymore. It was still in her ears, still creating this calm atmosphere around her. But her mind had stopped actively listening to it. Instead, the music had become like white noise, except better somehow. More organized, more soothing, and she was reading. Actually reading? Understanding the words, remembering what they meant, making connections between different concepts. Her mind wasn't wandering off to worry about money or replay awkward conversations from work. She was just there, present, focused on the material in front of her. After what felt like maybe 20 minutes, Lisa looked up at the clock. An entire hour had passed. A full hour of solid, concentrated studying. She couldn't remember the last time that had happened. She felt a little surge of something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope, maybe. Or just relief. Her brain wasn't broken after all. It just needed the right conditions to work properly. Lisa kept the music playing and dove back into her reading. By the time she had to leave for class, she'd gotten through both chapters and actually understood them well enough to take useful notes. It wasn't a miracle, exactly. She still had to do the work, still had to focus and think hard about difficult concepts. But somehow, the music created this bubble of calm focus around her that made everything easier. Over the next few days, she kept using the classical music while studying. Sometimes it was piano, sometimes strings, sometimes these old pieces by composers she'd never heard of before. It didn't matter much what specific music it was, as long as it had that calm, organized feeling to it. Her exam came and went. When she got the results back a week later, she'd scored an 86%. Not perfect, but leagues better than the barely passing grades she'd been getting all semester. Lisa stared at that score for a long time, feeling something shift inside her. Maybe she could actually do this. Maybe she could make it through college after all. All because of some old music that she'd never paid attention to before. She had no idea that this small discovery would end up changing not just her life, but the lives of thousands of other struggling students around the world. That part of the story was still waiting to unfold. After that first successful exam, Lisa became a bit obsessed. Not in a bad way, but in the way that happens when you discover something that actually works after trying so many things that don't. Wanted to understand why the music helped her focus so much. The problem was that not all classical music worked the same way. She'd learned this the hard way one evening while trying to study for her statistics class. She'd put on a random classical playlist and suddenly this intense, dramatic piece started playing. Lots of crashing cymbals and powerful orchestra swells. It was beautiful music, sure, but it made her heart race. She couldn't concentrate at all. It was like trying to study during an action movie, so she started paying attention to what actually worked and what didn't. She created a new folder on her laptop and began saving specific pieces that helped her focus, the gentle ones, the ones with steady rhythms and calm melodies, the ones that could fade into the background of her mind while still somehow keeping her brain in that focused zone. She spent hours going down rabbit holes online, reading about something called the Mozart effect. Apparently, back in the early 90s, some researchers had found that listening to Mozart could temporarily boost certain types of thinking. The media had gone crazy with it, claiming that classical music made babies smarter and all sorts of exaggerated stuff. But as Lisa dug deeper, she found more recent and more careful research. It wasn't really about Mozart specifically, and it definitely wasn't going to magically increase anyone's intelligence. What the research actually showed was more interesting and more useful. Certain types of music, especially from what's called the Baroque period, had a tempo of around 60 to 70 beats per minute. That's roughly the same as a resting heart rate. When your brain hears these steady, predictable rhythms, it can settle into what scientists call an alpha state. That's the relaxed but alert condition that's perfect for learning and remembering. New information, Lisa found this fascinating. It made sense, too. Think about how a baby calms down when you rock them at a steady rhythm. Or how people feel more relaxed when they hear ocean waves hitting the shore at regular intervals. Our brains like patterns. They like predictability. And apparently, Baroque composers like Bach and Vivaldi accidentally created the perfect patterns for focused thinking. She started exploring specific composers and pieces. Bach's cello suites became a favorite for deep reading sessions. There was something about the mathematical precision of Bach's music that matched perfectly with her analytical work. For her more creative assignments, like writing papers, she preferred Debussy. His piano pieces had a flowing, dreamy quality that seemed to unlock different parts of her mind. Then there was this composer named Satie, who wrote these pieces called gymnopadies. They were simple, repetitive piano melodies that barely seemed to change. At first, Lisa thought they might be too boring, but they turned out to be perfect for those late-night study sessions when her brain was already tired. The simplicity meant there was nothing to distract her, just a gentle musical backdrop that kept her awake and focused. Her study habits transformed completely. She created different playlists for different types of work. One for memorization, with very steady and repetitive pieces. One for problem solving, with slightly more complex music that engaged her brain without overwhelming it. One for creative writing, with flowing, emotional pieces that weren't too dramatic, and the results kept coming. Her grades climbed steadily upward. By the middle of the semester, she'd pulled her average back up to a solid B+. More importantly, she didn't feel like she was drowning anymore. Studying was still hard work, but it wasn't the frustrating, impossible struggle it had been before. Her friends started noticing the change. One day, her friend Rachel sat down next to her in the library and said, "Okay, what's your secret? Last month you were barely surviving, and now you look actually calm. What happened?" Lisa almost felt embarrassed explaining it. It seemed too simple, too easy. But she showed Rachel her playlists and explained what she'd learned about the music and the brain. Rachel tried it that same day and texted Lisa that night. "This is actually crazy. I just studied for 2 hours straight." 2 hours? I never do that. Word spread quickly in the way things do among stressed college students desperately looking for anything that might help. Soon, Lisa was getting messages from people she barely knew asking for her playlists. She'd share them, and then a few days later, she'd get excited messages back about how much the music had helped. Her friend David, who was struggling through organic chemistry, told her the music had saved his grade. Another student, Christina, said she'd used Lisa's playlists while studying for the MCA and felt more focused than she ever had before. Lisa started spending her free time refining the playlists. She'd test different pieces during her own study sessions, taking mental notes about which ones worked best for what purposes. She learned to avoid pieces with sudden loud sections that would jolt her out of focus. She figured out that transitions between songs mattered too. If there was a jarring gap or a dramatic shift from one piece to the next, it would break her concentration. She discovered that audio quality mattered more than she'd expected. Some recordings had inconsistent volume levels. One track would be nice and quiet, perfect for background studying. Then the next track would be noticeably louder. forcing her to stop and adjust the volume. It was a small thing, but those little interruptions added up. One evening, while working her shift at the coffee shop, Lisa had a thought. She was helping so many people just by sharing playlists. But she was doing it one person at a time, sending links through messages. What if she could reach more people? She mentioned the idea to Kelly, who immediately encouraged her to try. Make a YouTube channel, Kelly suggested. Just upload your playlists. Students all over the world are probably struggling the same way you were. Why not help them too? Lisa hesitated. She'd never made any kind of content before. She didn't know anything about video editing or YouTube algorithms or any of that stuff. Plus, there were already music channels on YouTube. Would anyone even care about hers? But then she thought about how desperate she'd felt just a few months ago. How she'd been on the verge of giving up, convinced that she just wasn't smart enough for college. If her playlists could help even a handful of other students avoid that feeling, wasn't it worth trying? During winter break, when she had more free time, Lisa set up a YouTube channel. She kept it simple. No fancy branding, no complicated videos, just her carefully curated classical music, uploaded as long compilations. For hours seemed like a good length. Long enough for a serious study session, but not so long that the file size would be unwieldy. For the description, she wrote something honest and straightforward. She explained that she'd been a struggling student with a dropping GPA, and that this specific collection of classical music had helped her turn things around. She shared a bit about the science behind it, some tips for how to use the music effectively. Then she hit upload and didn't think much more about it. She was still a full-time student with 2 part-time jobs. She didn't have time to promote the video or worry about view counts. She just hoped maybe some people would find it useful. She went back to her regular life, using her music to get through her own studies. Spring semester started, and she was busier than ever. She'd check her YouTube channel occasionally. It's more out of curiosity than anything else. A week after uploading, the video had 300 views. Not bad for something she'd just thrown together. 2 weeks later, it was at 2,000 views. By the end of the month, it had reached 15,000. Lisa stared at the number on her screen, not quite believing it. 15,000 people had watched her video, had studied with her music, and the comments section was filling up with messages that made her eyes water. Students from different countries, different schools, different majors, all saying the same thing. The music was helping them. They were focusing better. Their grades were improving. They were feeling hopeful again. Lisa realized she might have stumbled onto something bigger than she'd imagined. This wasn't just about her anymore. The numbers kept climbing in ways that Lisa couldn't quite wrap her head around. 20,000 views became 50,000, then 100,000. Within 3 months of uploading that first video, her classical study music compilation had been watched by over 200,000 people. The comment section had turned into something she'd never expected. It wasn't just students thanking her. It was people sharing their stories, opening up about their struggles in ways that were raw and honest, and sometimes heartbreaking. There was a medical student in India who wrote about studying 16 hours a day for her licensing exams. She said the music was the only thing keeping her sane during the hardest period of her life. A high school senior in Brazil commented that he'd been using the music every night while preparing for university entrance exams, and he'd just gotten accepted to his dream engineering program. One comment that stuck with Lisa was from a single mother in her 30s. She wrote about going back to school for a nursing degree while raising 2 young kids on her own. She could only study late at night after her children were asleep, and she was always exhausted. The music helped her make the most of those precious few hours. She'd just passed her first semester with straight A's. Lisa would read these comments during her breaks at work, sometimes getting emotional right there behind the coffee shop counter. She'd never imagined that something she'd created could touch so many lives. She'd just been trying to solve her own problem. And somehow that personal solution had resonated with people all over the world. The channel kept growing. Students started treating the comment section like a community space. They'd encourage each other before big exams. They'd share study tips and advice. When someone would comment about feeling overwhelmed or ready to give up, Dozens of other people would reply with support and encouragement. It was beautiful, but it was also making Lisa think. She'd graduated that spring with honors, ending up with a final GPA that she'd once thought was impossible. She'd been planning to take a year off before graduate school, maybe work full-time and save some money. But this YouTube thing kept pulling at her attention. Her subscriber count hit 500,000 that summer. 500,000 people had decided her content was worth following. That wasn't just luck or coincidence. That was real impact. Lisa started wondering if she could take this further. The original compilation was good. She was proud of it. But after months of reading comments and learning more about music and neuroscience, she knew she could make it better. She thought about all the little problems with her current video. The audio quality wasn't perfectly consistent. Some transitions between pieces were smoother than others. The selection of music was solid, but she'd learned so much since putting it together. There were pieces she'd discovered later that worked even better for studying. Plus, she'd gotten feedback from her audience. Some people wanted longer compilations for marathon study sessions. Others wanted versions without any silence between tracks. Perfect, seamless transitions. Some people mentioned that certain sections felt too melancholy, affecting their mood in a negative way. Lisa made a decision. She was going to dedicate the next year to this project. Really dive in and create something extraordinary. Not just another study music playlist, but the definitive collection. The one that incorporated everything she'd learned about music, neuroscience, and what actually helped people focus. She started researching in earnest. Not just casual reading, but deep dives into academic papers about music and cognition. She reached out to professors at her university who studied neuroscience and asked if she could interview them about how the brain responds to different types of music. One professor, Dr. Chen, was particularly helpful. She studied attention and memory, and she was fascinated by what Lisa was doing. They met for coffee, and Lisa explained her project. Dr. Chen shared research about how different frequencies and rhythms could influence brainwave patterns. The key is consistency, Dr. Chen explained. When people are trying to focus, any sudden change in their environment can break that focus. That includes changes in the music, volume spikes, tempo shifts, even gaps of silence. The brain notices these things, even if we're not consciously aware of it. Lisa took pages of notes. She learned about something called entrainment, where the brain's rhythms start to match the rhythms in the environment. She learned why certain musical keys and modes felt more calming than others. She discovered research on how different instruments affected concentration differently. She also started talking to music professionals. She reached out to audio engineers and asked about recording quality and mastering. She learned about compression and equalization, technical terms she'd never even heard before. She discovered that there was a whole science to making music sound consistent and professional across different playback devices. Lisa connected with musicians and music therapists. One therapist who worked with patients dealing with anxiety and PTSD explained how music could literally change someone's nervous system response. The right music could lower heart rate, reduce stress hormones, and create a physiological state that was optimal for learning. All of this information swirled in Lisa's mind as she started planning her ultimate collection. She wanted music that was mathematically precise enough to create focus, but emotionally warm enough to be pleasant to listen to for hours. She wanted perfect audio quality with seamless transitions. She wanted a careful progression through the compilation, starting with pieces that would gently ease someone into a focused state, maintaining that state through the middle sections, and then winding down toward the end. She expanded her research beyond the traditional classical canon. She discovered contemporary composers who were writing beautiful, minimalist pieces perfect for concentration. Composers like Arvo Pärt, whose music had a meditative quality. Max Richter, who composed at the intersection of classical and ambient music. Olafur Arnalds, whose piano and string compositions had exactly the right emotional tone. The project consumed her. She'd spend entire days listening to hundreds of pieces, taking notes on tempo, instrumentation, emotional quality, and how they made her feel during actual study sessions. She tested everything on herself first, using the music while she studied for some online courses. she'd enrolled in. She also paid attention to her YouTube community. She'd post polls asking what people wanted. Longer videos or shorter ones? More piano or more strings? Did people prefer music from specific periods or a mix of old and new? The responses were overwhelmingly helpful. Her audience knew what they wanted, and they weren't shy about sharing opinions. Some debates got quite passionate. There were people who insisted that only Baroque music truly worked for studying. Others championed Romantic period composers. Some wanted only solo piano, while others preferred full orchestral arrangements. Lisa realized she couldn't please everyone perfectly, but she could create something that worked well for the majority. She started making decisions about her ultimate collection based on a combination of scientific research, professional advice, personal testing, and community feedback. She also decided to make the collection completely ad-free. This was a bigger decision than it might sound. Her channel was big enough now that she could monetize it and make decent money from ads. Given that she was currently living on savings and the occasional freelance work, that money would be really helpful. But every time she thought about adding ads, she remembered being that exhausted student at 2 a.m. desperately trying to focus. The last thing that version of herself would have needed was to get jolted out of concentration by a loud advertisement every 15 minutes. Some of her friends thought she was being impractical. "You're turning down money for what?" "Principal," her friend David asked. "Companies put ads in everything. Nobody would blame you." But Lisa felt strongly about this. The music had helped her when she was struggling, and now it was helping hundreds of thousands of others. Making money from that felt wrong somehow. This wasn't a business venture. It was a gift she was giving to her community of stressed, hardworking students around the world. By the end of that year, Lisa had created something she was truly proud of. She'd curated for hours of absolutely perfect study music. Every piece had been carefully selected and tested. The audio had been professionally mastered for consistent volume and quality. The transitions flowed seamlessly. The progression through the compilation created a natural arc of focus and calm. But before she released it to the world, she wanted to add something extra. Something that would make this more than just a playlist. Lisa sat at her desk with a blank document open on her laptop. The music compilation was finished. 4 hours of perfectly curated, professionally mastered classical study music. It was everything she'd worked toward for the past year. But something felt incomplete. She'd learned so much during this process. About music, about the brain, about focus and learning. All that knowledge was sitting in her head and in scattered notes across multiple notebooks. It seemed like a waste to just release the music without sharing what she'd discovered, so she started writing. Not an academic paper, but a practical guide. Something that would actually help people, written in the same clear, simple way she'd want information presented to her. She explained the science, but in everyday language. How certain tempos could sync with your brainwaves. Why transitions between songs mattered. The difference between music that helps you focus and music that distracts you. She wrote about creating the right environment for studying. Not just the music, but lighting, temperature, removing distractions. She shared techniques for maintaining focus during long study sessions. The guide grew longer than she'd planned. She kept thinking of more useful information to include. Tips she'd learned from professors, tricks she'd discovered through her own experience. Advice from the community of students who'd been commenting on her videos. She wrote about the mistakes she'd made early on. Like that time she'd tried to study with Wagner playing and ended up feeling stressed instead of focused. Or when she'd made the mistake of putting on music she loved too much and kept getting distracted by wanting to really listen to it instead of using it as background. One section focused specifically on different types of studying and which music worked best for each. Memorizing facts needed different music than solving math problems. Writing essays required a different approach than reviewing notes. She'd tested all of this extensively and wanted to share what she'd found. She also addressed common questions she'd seen in comments over and over. What if classical music isn't your thing? She had suggestions for that. What about studying in silence versus with music? She explained when each approach might work better. How loud should the music be? She gave specific recommendations. The guide ended up being almost 50 pages. Lisa read through it multiple times, editing and refining. She asked Kelly and a few other friends to read it and give feedback. She wanted to make sure it was actually helpful and not just her rambling about things only she found interesting. The feedback was positive. One friend said it had already changed how he approached studying. Another said she wished she'd had this information years ago. Even Dr. Chen, the neuroscience professor, read through it and said Lisa had done a good job presenting complex concepts in an accessible way. Lisa decided to make the guide freely available as a downloadable PDF. She could have tried to sell it, but that felt wrong. For the same reason putting ads on the music felt wrong. This information should be available to anyone who needed it, regardless of whether they could afford to pay for it. She spent a few more weeks polishing everything. The music was finalized. The guide was complete. She created a simple but professional-looking cover image for the video. She wrote a description that explained what made this collection special and how to use it effectively then. On a Tuesday morning in September, she uploaded the ultimate 4-hour classical study music collection to YouTube. Along with the music, she included a link to download the free study guide. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the video had thousands of views. Her longtime subscribers had been waiting for this, and they showed up right away. The comments filled with excitement and gratitude. But what really surprised Lisa was how quickly the video spread beyond her existing audience. Students started sharing it with their friends. Study groups adopted it as their background music of choice. Teachers and professors recommended it to their struggling students. The view count climbed rapidly. 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. Within the first week, the Ultimate Collection had been watched by over 500,000 people. The study guide had been downloaded more than 200,000 times. The comments section exploded with stories. A pre-med student wrote about using the music during a brutal finals week in ACing. Exams she'd been terrified of failing. An adult learner in his 50s, going back to college after decades, said the music helped him compete with younger students who seemed to absorb information so easily. One comment came from a student with ADHD, who said that traditional study methods had never worked for them. They'd struggled for years, feeling broken and incapable. But the combination of this music and the techniques in Lisa's guide had finally given them a way to focus. They'd just completed their first semester with passing grades in every class. Another comment was from a student preparing for the bar exam. They described the incredible pressure, the massive amount of information to memorize, the fear of failure. The music had become their constant companion through months of studying. They just found out they passed. Lisa read every single comment. Thousands of them. Each one represented a real person, someone who'd been struggling like she had struggled, someone who'd found help in something she'd created. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. The video kept growing. News outlets started picking up the story. Local newspapers first, then larger publications. They were interested in the phenomenon of a simple study music video becoming such a viral success. They interviewed Lisa about her journey from stressed student to accidental YouTube creator. She was careful in these interviews to emphasize that this wasn't about her being special or entrepreneurial. She'd just been a desperate student who found something that worked and wanted to share it. The fact that it had helped so many people was both surprising and humbling. Some articles focused on the science angle. They'd interview neuroscientists who confirmed what Lisa had learned. Yes, certain types of music really could improve focus and memory. Yes, there was solid research backing this up. It wasn't just placebo effect or wishful thinking. Other articles explored the community aspect. How a YouTube comment section had become a support group for stressed students around the world. How people were forming study groups, specifically around using this music together. How teachers were incorporating it into their classrooms. The video's reach expanded beyond just students. Office workers discovered it and started using it for focused work sessions. Writers found it perfect for getting into a creative flow state. Even hospitals and medical clinics started playing it in waiting rooms after reading. Research about how it reduced patient anxiety within 6 months. The Ultimate Collection had accumulated over 5 million views. 5 million instances of someone choosing Lisa's music to help them focus, to help them learn. To help them get through a difficult task, the study guide had been downloaded more than 1 million times and translated by volunteers into 7 different languages. Students in countries Lisa had never visited were benefiting from the research and advice she'd compiled. She started getting emails from educators asking if they could use the music in their schools, from librarians wanting to play it in study areas, from companies asking if they could use it in their offices. Lisa said yes to all of it. The whole point was to help people. The more widely available it was, the better. One email particularly moved her. It was from a high school counselor who worked with students from low-income families. Many of them were first-generation college students. Overwhelmed by the academic demands and lacking the resources or support that their wealthier peers took for granted, the counselor had introduced them to Lisa's music and study guide, and was seeing real improvements in their grades and confidence. "You've given these kids a tool that's completely free and actually works," the counselor wrote. "You have no idea how rare and valuable that is," but Lisa was starting to understand. This project had grown far beyond anything she'd imagined that winter break when she'd first uploaded a simple playlist. It had become something that mattered to people, something that was genuinely helping them achieve their goals and change their lives. And she realized she wanted to dedicate herself to this work fully, not as a side project or a hobby, but as her actual life's purpose. 3 years had passed since that exhausted night when Lisa first discovered that classical music could help her focus. Looking back, it felt like a lifetime ago. She was a completely different person now, and her life had taken a direction she never could have predicted. The ultimate collection had become something bigger than a popular YouTube video. It had over 15 million views and had been featured in educational publications, productivity blogs, and even mainstream media. But more importantly, it had genuinely helped millions of people improve their ability to learn and focus. Lisa had made a decision that surprised many people who knew her. Instead of pursuing a traditional career path after graduation, she'd gone back to school, but not for the career she'd originally planned. She'd enrolled in a unique interdisciplinary graduate program that combined psychology, music therapy, and educational technology. Her professors were fascinated by what she'd created. They saw it as a real-world application of theoretical concepts they taught. Lisa got to turn her YouTube project into serious academic research. She had access to data that most researchers could only dream of. Millions of hours of listening time, thousands of comments and testimonials, a global community of users. Her thesis focused on the intersection of music and learning. She analyzed patterns in how people used the music, which times of day were most popular for studying with it. How long did people typically listen? Did usage patterns differ across cultures and countries? What did the self-reported outcomes look like? The data told fascinating stories. She found that most people used the music in sessions of 2 to 3 hours, usually in the evening. Students in different countries had surprisingly similar usage patterns, suggesting that the challenges of studying were universal. The self-reported improvements in focus and grades were consistent across different age groups and fields of study. But Lisa's research went beyond just analyzing her existing project. She was exploring bigger questions. How could music be better integrated into educational systems? What other applications might this have beyond just studying? Could similar approaches help people with attention difficulties or learning disabilities? She collaborated with other researchers, contributing to studies about music and cognition. She presented papers at conferences where educators and neuroscientists gathered. She was building bridges between the scientific community and the millions of regular people who'd discovered that classical music helped them think better. The YouTube channel kept growing without her having to do much to maintain it. The ultimate collection was evergreen content. It didn't matter if someone found it today or 3 years from now. It would still be useful. New comments appeared daily from people discovering it for the first time and experiencing the same transformation Lisa had experienced. She did occasionally create new content. Different variations on the original collection, shorter versions for quick study sessions, longer ones for marathon studying. Collections focused on specific purposes like creative writing or mathematical problem solving. but she was careful not to oversaturate. Quality over quantity was her philosophy. Lisa had stuck to her decision to keep everything ad-free. This meant she wasn't making much money from the channel, despite its massive popularity. Some people thought this was foolish, but Lisa felt it was important. The moment she started trying to profit from it, the whole nature of the project would change. She did accept some speaking opportunities at universities and education conferences, which paid modest honorariums. And she did some consulting work with schools and educational companies that wanted to understand how to better incorporate music into learning environments. This was enough to support herself, especially since her graduate program offered a stipend. What really mattered to her wasn't the money. It was the impact. The comment section of her video had become an archive of human stories. People documenting their struggles and victories, their fears and achievements. Lisa read these comments regularly. They never failed to move her. There was the student who'd been ready to drop out of nursing school because she couldn't handle the stress. The music had helped her push through. She'd just graduated and was working in a hospital, saving lives. She credited Lisa's music as one of the things that made her career possible. There was the father who'd gone back to school in his 40s to get a degree so he could provide better for his family. He'd written about the shame he felt studying alongside people half his age, feeling slow and stupid. The music and study guide had helped him realize he could still learn effectively. He'd graduated with honors. There was the teenager with severe test anxiety, who'd been failing exams despite understanding the material. The calming effect of the music had helped manage the anxiety enough that she could actually demonstrate what she knew. Her grades had transformed. She'd just been accepted to her dream university. These weren't just comments to Lisa. They were lives changed. Futures altered. Potential unlocked. All because of something that had started as a simple solution to her own problem. Lisa had also become a voice in conversations about educational equity. Her project demonstrated something important, that effective learning tools didn't have to be expensive or exclusive. Classical music was in the public domain. The study techniques she shared were free to anyone with internet access. This wasn't a tutoring service that only wealthy families could afford, or a prep course with a huge price tag. She spoke at a conference about education and inequality, arguing that part of closing achievement gaps meant making effective tools universally available. Her YouTube channel and free study guide were proof that this was possible. Millions of students from every economic background were using the same high-quality resource. Some companies had approached Lisa about partnering with them or selling her channel. The offers were substantial. Enough money to never worry about finances again. She'd turn them all down. The moment this became a commercial product, it would stop being what it was meant to be, a gift to struggling students everywhere. Her advisor in graduate school had warned her that this decision might limit her career options. Academia didn't always know what to make of someone with a massive public presence, but no interest in traditional monetization. But Lisa was okay with that. She was creating her own path. She'd been invited to consult on a research project, studying the effects of music on students with ADHD and other attention difficulties. The preliminary results were promising. The structured, predictable nature of Baroque music seemed to help some people with attention challenges focus better than they could in silence or with other types of music. This felt like the natural evolution of the work she'd started, using what she'd learned from her own experience and from millions of users to help even more people, especially those who struggled the most with traditional learning environments. Lisa still used her own music when she studied. Even after hearing these pieces thousands of times, they still worked. She'd sit in the library with her headphones on, working through research papers or writing chapters of her thesis, with Bach or Vivaldi or Debussy playing softly in the background. Sometimes she'd look around and notice other students studying with headphones on. She'd wonder if any of them were listening to her music. Statistically, in any given university library, probably several of them were, but she'd never know for sure, and that was fine. This had never been about recognition or fame. On the 3-year anniversary of uploading the Ultimate Collection, Lisa posted a simple thank you message in the community tab of her channel. She thanked everyone who'd used the music, everyone who'd shared their stories, everyone who'd supported the project. She shared a bit about where her life had gone since that desperate night. When Kelly had suggested she'd try classical music, the responses flooded in. Thousands of people thanking her back, sharing how the music had impacted their lives, telling her about exams they'd passed, degrees they'd earned, careers they'd started, all the dreams that had been made possible in some small way. By 4 hours of carefully curated classical music, Lisa read through the comments with tears in her eyes. She thought about how close she'd come to giving up on college, how lost and incapable she'd felt, how certain she'd been that she just wasn't smart enough to make it. And now here she was, not only having graduated with honors, but having helped millions of other people avoid that same despair, having turned her struggle into something meaningful, having discovered that sometimes the things we create to solve our own problems end up being exactly what the world needs. The music played softly in the background as she worked on her next research paper. The same gentle piano melodies, the same structured rhythms that had saved her all those years ago, they were still working their magic, helping her focus, helping her think clearly. And somewhere out there, in libraries and dorm rooms and quiet corners around the world, millions of other people were listening to the same music, studying for their own exams, chasing their own dreams, finding their own way forward. That was Lisa's legacy. Not fame or fortune, but simply this. She'd made it a little easier for people to learn, to focus, to achieve what they were capable of achieving. And that was more than enough.